Hello and welcome to A Fuller Understanding on the Auto Limits channel, where we are going through chronologically the films of Samuel Fuller. I am, as ever, your host Craig, and with me is my co-host Robert Beams. Hello, Rob.
Hello, Craig. How are you today?
I'm good. I've just been swimming. It's very wholesome
Lovely,
morning.
lovely,
Yeah.
lovely. I'm quite excited to speak about this one because
Yes.
it's a good one. It's a good one.
Yeah, we are talking about Sam Fuller's sixth film, Pick Up on South Street. And right from the off, let's put it all out on Front Street, as we're talking about South Street. This is his best so far, I'd say.
I would say, yeah. Yeah. It's between this and Steel Helmet for me, but I think this shades it for a lot of reasons, which we'll get into as we go. But yeah, this is 1953. This is one on his Fox deal, right?
Yeah, this is the second
is a
one
Fox
from
one.
his Fox deal. So we've got two more of his Fox deal afterwards. But this is this is coming off the back of Part Row, his one and only independently financed film. So he's gone back into after taking a bath on that one. He's gone back into the comfortable coffers of 20th Century Fox to pay for this one. And it comes as a sort of a very loose adaptation of a book called, oh God, I think it's called Blaze of Glory.
Okay.
Yeah, that just seems like something I should have known straight off the bat, but I'll correct myself later if it's not that. Yeah, it's a loose adaptation of a book. Very loose to the point where it seems to have been inspired by something,
Right.
and he's completely gone off on a tangent.
Okay. But the way Stanley Kubrick's films are all like based on books, but basically don't care about the books after a certain point.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, I'll leave you to go into the premise, Rob.
Okay, so this one, it was interesting because you messaged me when you were watching it saying how there was some stray dog parallels, and that's the first thing I picked up on because it starts with like I had the exact same thought. It starts with basically a pickpocketing going on a crowded train, doesn't it? A crowded
Yeah.
tram, which is what happens to Stray Dog. Somebody steals a lady's wallet, and it becomes apparent soon after that actually she was off to the, I suppose, titular pickup on South Street where she was going to drop this. It's always in Cold War movies. It's always like a microfilm, is it? It's always a film that gets it. So she was going to take off the microfilm of, I guess, sensitive government information to a kind of a communist agent. And she's acting as the kind of go-between. I don't think she's aware it's to do with communist agents and things. She's just
No.
kind of, she's got like a slightly violent, seedy sort of ex-boyfriend who's like, look, I know we're broken up, but you said you were going to do this one more drop for me, and he's kind of got a bit of a hold on her. And he sends her off on this drop. She comes back and says, look, it got pickpocketed. He starts freaking out, the violent sort of criminal communist sympathizing boyfriend. Meanwhile, the cops are again doing the stray dog thing of going across departments, looking at the kind of photos and trying to find out who the pickpockets are. And they bring in this woman played by Thelma Ritter, who is Oscar nominated for this role, very, very good in this role, who she comes in and helps them sort of like profile which pickpocket is based on what his kind of MO was, how he went about it. Did he hold a newspaper? Where did he hold it? How did he fold it? What did he do? So she kind of says, okay,
I
it's
love
one
it.
of these.
She asks a couple of questions, and then once she's got a feel for it, it's she starts leading. And then he did this, and then he did this, and then he did this. It's I went when I was I went to my wife's parents for Christmas a couple of years ago, and there was like a I can guess your Pokemon from 10 questions toy in a toy shop. And that's what it reminded me of. But anyway,
Yeah, it is a bit like that. She can tell you your Pokemon within 10 questions for sure. If your Pokemon is what do they call
a cannon.
they call them cannons. Yeah, they call them cannons. So she can tell a cannon. She's a kind of we'll get more into her as we talk about it in detail, but she's sort of an eccentric lady who's always trying to sell people a tie out of like a suitcase full of ties. And she's got the best lines in the film. I've had a problem with a lot of the Fuller ones up to now, even the better ones, where the dialogue can be really ropey, but the dialogue's really great in this. And there are some really great sort of one-liners as well.
I would still say that I still think the dialogue's great in all of them. It just comes down to how well the actors sell it, and she sells every word. I'm sure of it.
There are great lines in all of them, though, because Fuller can definitely write like a kind of, I guess, what we call a zinger, right? He can definitely write like a really good line. The problem is a lot of the other ones have a lot more of that exposition where people stand around and say things like, I'm here on behalf of the farmers because I'm a farmer or something. That doesn't happen in this film, even though there is a bit of exposition
I want to talk
to
about
deliver.
that in a bit as well.
Okay, so she sells out the pickpocket who it was, who has the best name in Fuller movies to this point. He's called Skip McCoy. I love Skip McCoy as a name. The main woman in it who's pickpocketed, she's called Candy, and then like the detective or something in charge is called Tiger. They've all got these really colourful names. Captain Dan Tiger, and so there's a lot of kind of colourful names.
And
in
his partner's called Winoki as well.
Okay,
Winoki.
So you got quite a few kind of colourful sort of character names. But so she says, okay, she negotiates as soon as she kind of knows who it is. She starts negotiating her rate, and then when they've agreed on it, she points out it was Skip McCoy, and they go to Skip McCoy. Skip McCoy lives on a sort of there's a Cormac McCarthy novel that's kind of slightly autobiographical and really kind of depressing and dirty called Suttree, that's about these people that live in these terrible shacks out on a river. And that's kind of where this guy lives. It really reminded me, like when I saw this, I was like, oh, it's like where the fella lives in Suttree. It's like this kind of shack that doesn't have any power or anything. It's just a wooden shack that's out kind of leaning over the river
it's like an abandoned it's like an abandoned office from like a working dock from the turn of the century. Like it's the sort of place you can imagine people sitting with their manifests kind of checking cargo in and out from, but it's just been left to sort of rot away on the side of the Hudson.
And he's it's in New York, so it's the Hudson. He's living in there. The police come round and they look for the microfilm, but he's cannily hidden it in a secret compartment at the bottom of a crate that he kind of lowers in and out of the river, and he disguises it. Yeah, he disguises it as like a beer cooler because he doesn't have any power. So that's quite cool, and he's kind of with the cops. So help yourself to the beers, lower it back in when you're done. And they don't obviously think anything of it, so they don't find it. But you kind of get, without going on a blow by blow of every minute of this film, what you get is a story where in the weakest element of the film, I think, because I think he kind of shoehorns a bit of a romance into these films unnecessarily, but you kind of get the Candy character ends up going after him to get her microfilm because she also speaks to the Thai lady. And then she ends up very quickly out of nowhere after he clocks her around the head, falling in love with him. And then because of that, she's now kind of foolhardy, kind of loyal to this guy. And there's this weird undercurrent. Like some of the contemporary reviewers were quite negative about the film. And one of the recurring things I saw was this idea that it seems to have this morality of like, criminals one thing and they're not that bad, but you don't want to be a commie. Which is definitely
well, that's weird.
They kind of have this weird code of honor among the criminals where it's just like there's even one later, like it's really great line from Thelma Ritter where she says, "What do I know about commies? Nothing. I know one thing. I just don't like them." And I thought that was brilliant.
That's weird. I mean, there's so many things that to put a pin in from that start. I mean, we'll go back and I'll talk about the politics as well because he mentions a lot of that. But if we go back right to the start, the kind of the straw dog starting, I thought it was an incredibly tense opening scene. Like it is stray dog. It's really well put together. You're kind of moving through this carriage. Everybody's really packed together. You're also not quite sure if Skip and Candy already know each other, and maybe they're trying to pass something between each other to begin with, because you've got the detectives watching Candy, and you're not. There's a hint to begin with that maybe that is the pickup. Like he's gone to pick something, but no, he's a pickpocket. There's just this weird little frisson there as well, where they seem to be working together almost to begin with. But it's done really well with close-ups and kind of light fingers and very kind of. He talks in his autobiography about having like a begrudging respect for the artistry of pickpocketing.
Mm.
Like to him, they're not hardened criminals. They are um, they're professionals. They've honed a craft. They're craftsmen.
Well, this predate, not to put a kind of too fine a point on this because they're very, very different films, but this predates by several years the Bresson film A Pickpocket, which is features a lot of these kind of close ups of like people moving their fingers very deftly to retrieve things from people's coats, and you do get that several times here, don't you?
Yeah, and he was told by Zanuck that he couldn't call this film Pickpocket because it sounded too European. Um, and so he had to give it a bit more of a noirish kind of title to it, and went with Pick Up on South Street. But yeah, I thought that opening scene was a real kind of attention grabber. Really,
Yeah, all it's kind of missing on the Kurosawa version is how sweaty Stray Dog
yeah,
is. It doesn't have that feeling, but it does. I did make a note originally on this film that right from the off, and I think it sustains this all the way through with a couple of small exceptions, it feels very authentic compared to other Fuller films. I mean, you'll
yeah.
tell me in the production notes maybe it's got more budget, but everything feels real in it.
But it feels really lived in.
Mm,
Like there's scenes later where Joey comes around to the apartment with Candy, and she's in the bath, and she has to get out. Like you don't walk into a scene, and you like you were saying with that exposition. It's not like people going, right, we're in a room. What are we doing in a room? You kind of keep going. You keep sort of coming into things midway through the action, where they kind of let you kind of Fuller kind of lets you have to think about for about 30 seconds or so about what's going on before it kind of becomes more apparent. There's a lot less of that show don't tell. And the last thing I just wanted to say about that opening scene as well, it's done without dialogue, and it's a good comparison with his first film, Jesse James, the way that goes straight into the bank heist,
mm.
and that it's all done with looks and glances. And but anyway, that was by the by. But yeah, I've written down here, this feels very lived in. This feels very, like you say, real. This film. There's just
Because the
there's
others
so
have.
many details in the production design and everything that just
Mm.
feel authentic and gritty.
I think the others to this point, because of budget mostly, have felt sometimes very set down and very artificial and kind of very sparse in terms of the cast and kind of everything. And even on that really interesting kind of quite good crane tracking shot stuff you get in Park Row, there's still the very obvious feeling that at the end of each row there is like at the end of each block there's a painting, and the extras are sort of moving on cue almost. It's very, whereas this doesn't feel like that at all. This feels
Yeah,
very much like a, I hate to say it in this way because it's really disparaging, and there have been good ones so far. This just feels like a proper studio movie
it
era.
does, and it's interesting you say that as well, because another thing that he talks about in his autobiography is his frustration of being on a backlot, that
Right.
he was taking in the Italian neorealist films at this point, and he wanted to shoot something on the streets, but all he had was the backlot and the set builders. So he clearly put a lot of thought and effort and time into getting the right people in the right place to make it look authentic.
Mm,
Because the scenes, I really like the high angle scenes of his shack on the docks on the waterfront. Just it kind of really, you really get a sense that place is real, and then into the shack, the, like I say, the lived in, that the water, the beer cooler that goes in and out of the Hudson's just
mm.
a really nice detail as well. It's
The way
just
you follow it up out of the water as well is really nice.
yeah, absolutely.
I
um
I think
yeah, go on.
it seems on this one because in some of the other one, every single film up to this point, I think we've had a lot of those optical zooms where it's clear that he's kind of editing around what he very quickly shot. I think there might be one instance in this, although it's a lot better done. But otherwise, this feels so much more like so much more thought has gone into exactly how he wants to shoot it and compose it, and so much more time has presumably been spent on it. Because I know when you talked about Park Row, it was something silly like, oh, he made it in 10 days or something. This, I'm presuming that isn't the case with this one.
20.
Okay, well, good on him because it doesn't feel like it was made in 20 days. I've
But
not
you're right.
done it. Yeah,
There's a lot more kind of. There's a lot more interesting compositions. The high angles of the. They're not just like crane shots for the side. They're kind of sweeping, and you kind of get an idea of what's going around. There's some
there's
really nice long lens stuff where Skip will be in the front ground and in the foreground, and in the background you've got images of New York at night, and there might be a bridge or something, and there's a lot of sort of match cut dissolves from one and transitions from one scene to another.
When I realised, sorry, go.
It's just a much more visually assured film than anything we've seen from him so far.
It is, like, when I realised that I was in for a really good one here was at the very beginning, after the sort of stray dog scene, when she realizes she's had her purse sort of pinched. You're seeing her from this low angle, and I thought, that's different. That's not what you usually shoot. So he's shooting her at this low angle. Then as she starts to panic, the camera kind of pulls up and kind of pushes in on her. And then she starts to move, and the camera moves with her and kind of moves around this kind of station, and then follows her into a phone booth. And then while she's in the phone booth talking to her boyfriend saying, "Oh, I've had my pocket pinched," you've got so much life going on behind the phone booth. Like, you've got the back window, and you've got people coming by, and it feels like a busy station, and it's just so polished. I like, especially, I didn't realize this one was another very quickly shot film. It shows, for me, this shows a real evolution of him as a director, this film.
Yeah, I mean, there's some the subway scenes at the end as well have got that same feeling to them. Although I did notice the three nuns walking by, which felt very Airplane, you know. But yeah, it's like I say, lived in is the best way to describe it. Everything looks really authentic. Yeah,
the only bit in the film that has his kind of, to this point, trademark slight sloppiness, let's get this done quick aspect is, I don't know if you noticed it stood out to me a lot. There's a scene late on where the baddie, the baddest man, he punches out a cop in like a back alley or something, and then a cat gets very obviously thrown into the frame. Like, there's supposed to be just like a cat wanders in because it's like an alleyway, but you see the cat kind of get launched and then kind of stand there a bit confused, and it's clearly just like, we don't have time to watch to coax this cat into this shot.
Funnily enough,
throw the cat.
Funnily enough, I did see. I did make a note of the cat, but I must have been looking at the right side of the frame because I didn't notice the launching. And so I thought, that's really nice, having this cat sort of just milling around in the background and then running off.
He really gets chucked in.
I think, I think maybe if the cat wasn't thrown, it would have been really much nicer. Can we go back to Thelma Ritter's introduction as well?
Yeah.
No, because she comes in and she's like... she just comes in like a hurricane, like, and just kind of starts to steal the film from right at the beginning. Like, she's got so much presence and so much energy to her when she comes in. And the thing was, I didn't realize at that point that the police was called Tiger. So she keeps, it's like, I thought she was just calling everybody Tiger in a very kind of casual way, but that puts another layer on it. Yeah, you were really impressed with her as well, weren't you?
I really liked her a lot. She was actually Oscar nominated for this film. You'll know better than me whether that's a real outlier for Sam Fuller or whether he gets a few more noms later on for his films. But she was Oscar nominated for this one. It's easy to see why. She's absolutely terrific in it. I didn't, in the synopsis, I didn't get through to the very end. So kind of her character ends up having, well, has quite a tragic arc, really. Her whole motivation for even selling people out, selling these ties and everything, is that she's an old kind of part of this criminal fraternity who's worried that she's going to be planted in a pauper's unmarked grave in Potter's Field by the state. So she's trying to get enough money together to be able to afford a proper burial, because she's an old lady. And she's got one of her great lines. I've written down 3 of her lines. One of them is, if I was going to be buried in Potter's Field, it would just about kill me. Which I love. So she's motivated by that to avoid this kind of fate of being in Potter's Field. And she's a real live wire, isn't she? She's a real kind of a firecracker in these scenes. She's got great delivery, and also, like, to jump ahead slightly, she ends up becoming a cropper of the commie bad guy. And that's where she says the other line I said about not knowing about commies, but she just knows she doesn't like them. And there's a whole kind of monologue she gives on her bed about being old and everything hurts now and I'm just too tired and I just can't be bothered anymore and you might as well kill me. And it's actually really sad and it's really well delivered. And there's nothing in any of the Fuller films up to this point, let alone with a minor supporting character, where there's that much sort of pathos, really. Like we are actually really buying into somebody as a human being, and that's really present here.
And ended so subtly with just a little pan over to the record player, and then the gunshot. You hear the gunshot, and then you're out.
The music ends, I think, first. The song ends that she's listening to, and then the gunshot. It's very well done. Back to the
and then we got another character who just comes in for one scene, who's amazing, and he's called
Lightning Louie, isn't it?
Yeah. So
this is where you started your fantasy casting, isn't it?
We'll talk about that. Yeah. But and I've got some information about the actual real casting as well. That's good. So Candy doesn't have access to the police, so she's doing the same thing about trying to find out who the canon was who picked her pocket, but she's doing it through the underground. So she goes into this Chinese restaurant and sits down with this huge fella who's just shoveling noodles in his face.
He's grotesque, isn't he? He's absolutely grotesque, this guy.
And not even looking at her. She's kind of looking towards the camera and he's looking off left and he's not even acknowledging that she's there. And she's like, "Have you heard of this guy, Lightning Louie? Who's this guy, Lightning Louie?" And he goes, $20, and I'll tell you. And gives him $20. And he goes, "I'm Lightning Louie," like that, and carries on eating. And then she doesn't believe him, so he calls over one of the waiters and says, "What's my name? What's my street name?" And
he's like, "Yeah, the waiter's like, your uptown name or your downtown name or something like that."
And he's not really helpful. He doesn't really push it doesn't really push along much. I think, does he give the name?
He's the one who sets her to Thelma Ritter, to Mo.
Right.
That's where he makes that connection.
So it's kind of, I mean, it's only 80 minutes long, but if it was even if you were to make a tighter cut of an 80-minute film, it's something that could probably go. But he makes such a impression. It's just, again, it's another one of these sort of lived-in details that kind of fills the world out in a really believable way. The guy who played him was called Victor Parry, and he was a Chicago magician that Sam Fuller saw on stage, and it was the one and only film role he ever did. He was just like, Fuller basically says, "I really needed this big sort of repellent fella to play Lightning Louie, and I saw him on stage." So I asked him to come in. He just wanted someone with complete arrogance and complete disregard for everything that was going on around him. And I don't know how he sold that to Victor Parry, but I get the impression he wasn't playing too far from reality.
Okay, because he's very grotesque. Like it's almost like Mr. Creosote from The Meaning of Life or something. He's this big bloke, and he's kind of going the entire time, slurping these noodles through a bowl as he's talking, and it's very sweaty. It's like just a really uncomfortable scene, but it's really memorable, which is why I knew as soon as you said, "And there's another memorable character," I was like, "Are we talking about Lightning Louie?"
Yeah, and that is where I started my my fantasy casting for a remake.
We'll talk about your recasting at the end, shall we? Shall we go through the recast? So what happens next is she ends up talking to Mo, Candy does, and then she ends up sending her to where Skip lives. And she starts searching Skip's house, and he turns up and he can see a torch kind of going around in there. You can see that somebody's in his gaff. So he goes on and clobbers them, and then she's knocked out. He sees that it's this woman. And this scene is the worst scene in the film. This is why the film isn't 5 stars for me, because this scene, like where he knocks her out, and then he sees it's a woman, so he's smiling. And the music's all like jaunty, like it's a funny, nice, meet cute. She's out cold. He's punched her. And then he's smiling at her. He steals all her money from her bag. And then he wakes her up by pouring beer in her eyes. And then as soon as she gets up, it stops being the jaunty music, starts being romantic music, because he starts going, "Oh, your face hurts, does it? Let me massage your face." And there's this really weird scene where he's like holding her face really close to his face and like rubbing it. And then there's all this like romantic music, and then they kiss. and it's the weirdest fucking thing in the whole film.
Well, I mean, I think it maybe doesn't come across because I didn't read this, but reading it, reading what Fuller's intention and what he believes he got across in that scene is that these are two people from the underworld doing something sort of not quite transactional, but they're being tactical with what they're doing. So she's using her femininity. She's trying to use her femininity, and he's trying. I don't understand why he would be suave and kind of, but she's trying to sort of get herself out of the situation, and he's trying to. I can't remember what Fuller says, but the idea is it's not a genuine kiss. It's not a genuine moment of romance in that point. It's two people kind of reacting in the way that best suits their needs in the moment. But for him, it's not where the seeds of romance start in the film.
No. It's not where they start for the characters, because it is like I kind of missed it. It's like at the beginning of She's All That, the boy being told to pretend to go out with the girl. But it's still weird because it's got this kind of jaunty music behind it, and because even for a film in 1953, having a man just kind of cold cock a woman unconscious and then pour beer in her face. If you consider that, like in Public Enemy, it was shocking that James Cagney put a pie in a woman's face. Like, that was a thing that actually like made audiences go like, when that came out. Like, the fact that the way he treats her in this scene is really kind of violent, and the violence in this film is quite visceral.
Well, that's it. To go back to that and go back even further to what you're talking about, modern rereadings about communism. And I agree with this. This is how I see the film as well. Sam Fuller isn't at all concerned with communism like one bit. The film doesn't care about communism, and none of the characters do either. The microfilm, and the reason that people want it, is a complete MacGuffin. And what he's interested in is this story from the point of view of the lowliest characters in society, and how they are all basically looking out for themselves. Even Joey doesn't really care about the cause. He's just got this stuff and he knows the communists will pay for it. Skip's making his living being in a pickpocket. Candy doesn't seem to be able to do anything, which is a different problem in the film, but she's getting by, first of all, by trying to stay on the right side of Joey, and then trying to stay on the right side of Skip. But that's what the characters are doing. It's all about survival. Mo sells her tickets and sells people out because that's how she can make money for her grave. And there is an understanding amongst all these people that people do what they need to do. So that's why Skip doesn't blame Mo for selling her out and is still very fond of her. So that is the film that Sam Fuller set out to make, and I think that is what he made. So, all the communism stuff, I think, is a misdirect that kind of is there as a kind of a contemporary relevance, and to sort of almost like a selling point. If it had been made in the early 2000s, they would have put some, well, maybe not because it was a different political climate, but they would have changed that. Do you know what I mean?
The Al Qaeda microfilms. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Or if it had been made in Germany, it would be a Bader Meinhof thing. Or if it had been made in Spain, there'd be some sort of
I get what you're saying.
thing.
I get what you're saying. The reviews that were talking about it having that moral were contemporary ones, though, that I was talking about from the time. That was sort of
right.
one of the things that got criticised about the film. The reason I don't fully agree with what you're saying, although I think that's the intention, and I think you're right that it is mostly a MacGuffin, but there are several points in the film where they make a point of showing, because Skip McCoy is not shown to be like a traditionally like good guy, but he does make a point several times of saying, look, he might be a low-life criminal, but he's not a commie. And then there's a bit near the end of the film where one of the detectives is in a bit almost like, the end of Psycho, where they have to make out it was a very serious educational film about mental illness. They just have like a room of men in white coats going, so you see, he was attracted to his mother or whatever, and it becomes this weird thing. There is a bit at the very end where one of the detectives says to one of the other detectives, you see, even though those criminals are really bad, you can always trust a good American criminal not to be as bad as a communist or something like that. So I knew they wouldn't go with the communists, but it feels very like, it feels like that's there for the audience and for the studio to kind of make it very clear where their sympathies lie.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but you know, it was another film that got him in front of J. Edgar Hoover, who hated the film because he thought it was too kind to the communists. So it was yet another example of the left and the right kind of not seeing
The
things
same
in the way
thing from him, yeah.
exactly. So you know, I think that's what, you know, there might be some general commie bashing because, you know, that's the climate, but I don't think it's particularly what the film is kind of really in the heart of the film.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I say I sort of mostly agree, because I agree it is mostly a MacGuffin, and it's there because it's the thing to give it that sort of thriller juice that kind of it raises the stakes and it makes it this kind of larger than life thing. But I think maybe because of the sensitivity of the subject matter, they do have to make it very clear where the film's sympathies lie in regards to the commies at several points, which I think is one of the things that kind of marks it out, and that some of the contemporary reviews seem to have noticed about it, that they kind of saw in an unfavorable way. It's interesting to hear that it was also attacked from the side of the kind of the anti-communist right. I suppose I can see that might be because traditionally in this type of film, the people smuggling the Soviet microfilm, whatever, would be just terrible, whereas it's Candy who we see is like a character we're supposed to like, and so I suppose that's where that comes in. And also the Skip McCoy as well. He's not overly interested with doing the patriotic thing, is he? He's going to play it to his advantage and try and get money out of it and everything. So yeah, I can see where that's coming from.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you say, he's still, when he realizes what he's got in that great scene where he loses his tail and then goes into the
Public library
to look at the microfilm and then puts the other thing in, he realizes kind of what he's got and who's after it. His first thought is to make money off it. You know, so there's very little kind of you know, full-chested flag waving in the film.
Well, there's at least 2 times, maybe 3 times, where being a flag waver is an insult as well, isn't it? It's kind of laughed at, where he'll be like, "You really waving a flag at me?" You know, which I suppose in the context of the McCarthy 50s is probably quite an inflammatory thing to be saying, because of course you should be waving a flag. It's America. Be a patriot.
I mean, if anything, you know, that's probably got worse since the 50s.
Yeah.
And there's just one more scene I had about their non-meat cute was nobody calls a guy called Skip Mr. McCoy. Which is what she does several times. She calls him Mr. McCoy. And I thought, no, you don't call a guy called Skip that. He's Skip. He's always Skip. Yeah. But anyway.
What did you think of that scene, though? Because I get the impression you weren't as down on it as I was. It seemed to me to be... I understand what you're saying, that it's not the genuine genesis of their romance, but it felt tonally off, and it also felt like, here we go again. Sam Fuller's telling an interesting story, but there needs to be some idea that there's a romance in it, I guess, because it's a movie.
I mean,
he's done in every film.
I think there needs to be a romance in it as well, because it is a studio film. You know, that's not... I mean, that is... that's more of a fair criticism, I think, at Park Row, which is independently produced and he's got full control over, and really does come out of nowhere. I mean, this is a classic noir. I've put in my notes hipster's choice noir. Like this is the one. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've seen Double Indemnity in this, but have you seen Pick Up on South Street? You know. But like I say, it's a studio film. There are beats that it needs to hit to satisfy the paymasters as well. So that didn't bother me as much, to be perfectly honest. And I've got notes about the taking the bath and coming in mid-time. I want to talk a little bit about the violence as well, because it is really brutal. Like the scene where Joey. So there's a scene where Joey, her boyfriend, wants to know where Skip is. He knows where Skip is. He knows that Skip has got the microfilm, and he kind of Candy and Skip have interacted a few more times, and you're right, seemingly out a very small space, not quite out of nowhere. She's fallen in love with him, and she won't give him up. So he beats her and then shoots her. But there's just one bit where, well, I mean, the whole thing's pretty brutal, and the film was called up for being brutal. But the bit where he kind of grabs hold of her and throws her head first into the lamp, like in
Yeah.
this wide shot like that, it's really shocking.
Really shocking.
Because there's no way, even with props and whatnot, this is, he properly throws her, and then pushes her into a clock and hits her, and it's a difficult watch, that scene.
It is, and it's really full on. It's interesting that it is that sort of visceral and that violent, particularly when it's this man kind of beating up a woman as well on film, and you have as well the aftermath of the violence. It's not she's not like movie injured by it. She's like, you know what I mean? She's not got like a little bruise and she's in soft focus going, oh, it's okay. She's got real like welts and prostheses all over her face after this attack.
And then she's bleeding out on the floor, and then it goes into an incredible scene after that. Like, so you don't leave that. He tries to get out the door, but the police are coming in. They hear the shot and they come in, and he's kind of running around, and he finds this dumb waiter to hide in, and he hides in the dumb waiter and gets himself halfway down, and the two police are still searching the apartment for him. One of them looks at the top and he's looking down through it, and then the other one goes down to the bottom, and Joey's sitting there with just this little shaft of light. The lighting in the film throughout is really incredible. He's got this little shaft of light and he's holding this pistol, and they're checking the dumb waiter, and the guy is at the bottom slowly pulling this thing down. And all you've got in your head is Joey with this gun, and he's just going to open the door and like potentially shoot this guy in the face as he comes out. It's such a tense scene, and it's coming down so slowly. It was really, really. I thought it was a really, really top first class scene. That
I agree. Yeah, I thought that was really, really great. And
that scene actually gave the film an extra half star from me on Letterboxd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really good scene. I like the way it's not played for comedy, but it's almost comical as way that he's hiding in the dumbwaiter. And like you say, one of the cops is at the top looking down and the other cop's at the bottom, and they start using the dumbwaiter as a kind of a walkie-talkie to kind of talk to each other across the building. So they're kind of shouting through the guy, going like, have you seen him? No, I've not seen him. And then one of them's like, well, check the dumbwaiter as well.
It's got that kind of Cohen-esque absurdity to it, hasn't it?
Yeah. It was really good. There was actually, if I could just travel backwards in time to when Thelma Ritter gets shot by Joey, I do have another line of hers written down, which is very similar to the "if I was to be buried in Pottsfield, it would just kill me." She says, "I gotta go on making a living so I can die."
Yeah, there's also a bit where she's you see her coffin being taken off a boat. I kind of not exactly zoned out, but I was distracted at that point. I didn't go back. What was going on in the when the coffin's taken off the boat? How's that? How does that play out?
Yeah, I think they just kind of cut to the coffins, don't they, to kind of seal the idea of how anonymous she's kind of now being just lumped together with all these other paupers.
Yeah, but they stop the boat and ask for her coffin to be taken off the boat.
Yeah, I have to confess I don't remember. I have no notes about what happened there, so I don't know on that one. But
just before she dies, there's this really great kind of high-angle shot where she's walking through the steelworks as well, really slowly trying to sell her ties, isn't it? Yeah, there's just some really visually memorable moments in the film.
There are, yeah, and I think she is the kind of the MVP of this film for sure, Thelma Ritter. I think she's fantastic in it. We haven't mentioned the other actors; they're not people who, apart from obviously Lightning Louie, who's legend. Richard Widmark is Skip McCoy, not an actor I'm familiar with, and Jean Peters as Candy. I don't think either of those are actors. I think I've seen them in other stuff when I looked at them on Letterboxd, but not things where I actually sort of know who they are. I did recognize the name Richard Kiley for Joey because in Jurassic Park, that's the guy who does the announcements in the park. John Hammond's like, the voice you're now hearing is Richard Kiley. We spared no expense. So I thought, okay, well that's good. We've got this is me seeing Richard Kiley in the wild.
Well, it's interesting. He talks. There's quite an extended section in his autobiography about the casting of Gene Peters, um, which someone has very handily summarised on Wikipedia for me. But he went through a lot of actors and auditions before he got to this, and there's a really kind of 1950s reason why he finally went for Gene Peters, which wouldn't fly in the modern age. But he went through Shelley Winters, Ava Gardner, Betty Grable, and the one that he spends most of the time talking about is Marilyn Monroe, and that she apparently was really upset not to get this particular role.
Okay.
But the reason why he goes for the reason why he goes for Gene Peters is in 1953, writing in the 90s in his autobiography, is that she thought that she was slightly bow-legged and walked like an ex-prostitute was his reasoning.
Okay.
It was a different time. But he also talks in there about rehearsing. He also talks about rehearsing the scenes with him, and like she had a jealous boyfriend who would sort of ride with her in the car and then stay in the car throughout the whole rehearsal period,
Wow.
throughout the whole thing, and that was Howard Hughes.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. So some good stories in there about that. He also talks a little bit about Richard Widmark being a bit of a prick on set and not taking direction, but him sort of shutting that down pretty quickly. But he writes a lot in this. He writes a lot in his biography about the making of this, and he seems to be really particularly proud of this film.
Okay, I think that's fair enough. I think he can be justly proud of it. Am I right in thinking he works with Richard Widmark again on one of the next ones? Right.
I
I
think
think
so. Yeah, quite possibly.
Hell and High Water stars
That's
Richard
the next.
Widmark.
Yeah, that's the next
The
film
next
we're going to
Fox
watch.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they obviously settled their whatever early problems there were.
Yeah.
So I don't really have any more notes on this, to be honest. My last notes are about the dumbwaiter and the horrible violence. But it comes to a very 1950s Hollywood conclusion where you get the kind of the rise in action and then no kind of come down from that at all. It's like one of those films from this era always do this thing, don't they? Where it's like the big climactic thing, the baddie's been caught, the good guy's been let off, title card, the end. I think the final line's quite weak.
But even so, like when you think about this, is something that we'll see again. The good guys, the good guys ride off into the sunset. If we're talking about Hays Code and that kind of thing, the good guys are a pickpocket and like a gangster's mole. Then they are in another film because
They would
Candy
need their
survives being shot.
comeuppance.
Yeah, in another film, Candy's dead, and Skip gets
He's
his
arrested because his fourth strike and he's out. Yeah,
exactly. Or at best, he would at best, absolute best, he would
heroic
sacrifice.
death.
Yeah, or he'd sacrifice himself, or he would sort of do the right thing but implicate himself in a crime at the same time.
Hmm.
Like Jimmy Cagney at the end of the film escapes me, but the one where the priest says to him, "You have to go out looking like you were terrified, otherwise the boys will set your example. You need to kill the hero worship of you." So he screams and cries as he's going to the electric chair. That's in the best case scenario for most films. That's it. The pickpocket they don't have a happy ending. So there is.
Yeah.
And that is something that we'll see again in some of his other films later on, is the idea that he talks about seeing these kind of people on the fringes of society, were the people that he spent time with when he was touring the country as a reporter, and the people that he has respect and empathy towards. There's a real humanity to the way he treats his characters, I think.
Yeah, I think while I'm not one of those people just opposed to a kind of a happy ending at all, I think it possibly would be a stronger film if he made some heroic sacrifice and died in a blaze of glory, just because the final scene is really wet. Like the final scene of the film, the guy's like, "Oh, Skip, I'm gonna get you soon. You're gonna fall a cropper," and then Candy's just like, "I wouldn't bet on it," and then they walk off, and it's just like, that's not a reference to anything that's happened in the film. I don't think. I don't think there's a sort of a
I
gambling thing
think,
going on. I don't think there's
I
anything.
think, I
It's just
think
a
the
weak
this,
line.
yeah, I think the suggestion that he wanted was that they were going to carry on their life of crime, basically, but it doesn't quite
But
come
they
across.
weren't going to get caught. Yeah.
There's also a sort of anticlimactic fight at the end. It starts really well, and there's like a fight in a bathroom, and it spills out across the subway, and then they end up going down the tracks, and you're kind of
You
promised
think he's gonna?
someone's so you're
Yeah.
promised someone's going to get hit by a train, but it just crossfades into the next scene before
Yeah.
the fight really finishes.
Yeah. That's absolutely it. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I didn't actually have it in my notes, but I was absolutely on the edge of my seat thinking he's going to throw the guy in front of the train. And then you do just cut to the police station, and it is like I say at the end of Psycho, it's suddenly people in the room going, "Well, that's what happened."
Well, that's
And
the thing.
it's
That's the thing. You know, we often talk about films being too long, and we're like, "Oh, these are great 80 minutes." But I give me another 10 minutes. I want to
yeah,
see Joey under the train. Give me more of an ending. You know, I could have happily sat through more of this film.
I could have done another 10. Yeah, you'll never catch me hear me saying that again. But I could have done another 10 of this. Yeah, I think this was my favorite so far. Like I really have affection for Steel Helmet, and I've liked aspects of all of them in different ways, little bits of them and larger sections of some of them. But I think this is the most polished of all the films we've seen so far. And that might make it sound kind of clinical, like I just want him to be turning out the most basic studio products, but it really does feel with this one like he's kind of really found, I don't know, more enthusiasm for, maybe it's more of a budget thing than his own enthusiasm, but like he's getting into the actual directing of it, whereas I think before he was maybe more interested just in the subject matter that he was covering
Yeah,
in some way.
he talks about being much more assured, and he talks about, although the financial problems of Part Row being one thing, giving him much more confidence that he actually went out and struck out completely on his own and did this, and kind of he comes back to Fox feeling much assured, basically much more assured, and I think it's really I think it's really telling within the film itself. And there's just one last little thing, because I want to talk about the violence one more time.
Mm.
There were lots of quotes I could have pulled for this, but this is the one that I really liked, because we've gone from sort of bashing Goddard in other things to doing a little bit of John Wayne bashing in this particular series. So if you're trying to be, he says, this is talking about the violence and criticism of violence. So he says, if you're trying to be honest, how can you make a gangster movie or a western without showing the savage tools of the trade? How can you tell a story about war without showing the bloody absurdity of warfare? How can you depict gangsters, cowboys, or soldiers motivated by anything other than their will to survive? You can't unless you're John Wayne. Don't get me wrong, I love Wayne personally, but he became a star because audiences were sold fantasy, which unfortunately sells better than fact. Entertaining as they are, those heroes that Wayne played just didn't exist in reality. See, the one thing I hate in Wayne's war movies is someone invariably says these men have given their lives for their country. What bullshit. They didn't give their lives were taken away. They were robbed. When we signed up for military service, if someone had told us in the get-go we'd have to given our lives, no one would have enlisted.
Mm. That's interesting. It's I was originally going to be glib before it got real there and say that he's got Wayne backwards because I hate Wayne personally, but I really like a lot of his screen roles. But hearing what he's specifically talking about that way of sort of misleading young men about war and things like that, I think it's obviously a fair point. Coming from somebody that obviously fought in the war, I can't really intercede on that one. But it's interesting that he likes him personally. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
it's I guess Fuller though isn't really, like we've said, he's not really nailed to any particular political mast, is he? He's very
No, he's definitely not a partisan. Yeah, but yeah, that was Pick Up on South Street. I think we've said every. Oh no, we were going to go through the recast, weren't we?
Yeah, you've done a recast. I never recast it, but I'm looking forward to your recast.
Well,
I
it
think
was
it all
just what.
started with Patient Zero as Lightning Louie, wasn't it?
Yeah,
From the
and I
sounds of
just
it.
sent you a message saying Paul Walter Hauser.
Yeah.
So that got me on thinking about. I mean, this is probably not a great point anyway, but I was thinking about the rest of it, and I ended up with quite a B movie cast as well. So, in his autobiography, he talks about Richard Widmark not being classically handsome.
Okay.
So, which I didn't think about, but originally I went for James Franco, and then I thought, no, you can't cast him in anything anymore. He's a terrible human being. So I went with the second Harry Osborn, which was Dane DeHaan, who I thought was nice and intense,
Yeah.
and not classically handsome. Selma Blair would make a good Candy, a young Selma Blair, I thought. Joey reminded me of Jimmy Simpson, who's McPoyle from It's Always Sunny. You'll notice him from other things if you see him, but
Yeah.
he's and then for Mo, I don't know if anybody watches The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, but I thought Carol Kane would
Yeah, I
make a
know Carol
great Mo.
Kane, yeah.
Yeah, that was my
Yeah.
recast anyway.
It's interesting because Fox did remake this film in the late 60s.
Yeah,
They remade it as the Cape Town Affair with James Brolin and other people who I haven't heard of. And it's 20 minutes longer as well. But yeah, interesting. I don't know. This doesn't seem, but from the fact that the Wikipedia entry for the Cape Town Affair is so slim, makes me think it's not one that's necessarily stood the test of time.
no,
But
not at
interesting
all.
that they remade this anyway. It shows it must have been a bit of a success then, right?
Yeah, I think I didn't actually look too much at it. I think it won some sort of prize at Venice. I didn't. He doesn't talk much about the financial success, although according to Wikipedia, it had a budget of 750,000 and made almost two.
Hmm.
So it washed its face and then some. I don't know what. I don't know what 2 million really translates to in 1953, but a solid picture with in solid picture in business terms anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really good. It's a really good lesser seen noir, I think. And I'd recommend anyone watch this for a fun 80 minutes.
Yeah, it's 80 minutes. It's on YouTube. What's not to like?
Absolutely.
That's the thing. Is so far they're all on YouTube, aren't they? All of the ones we've watched. So
Yeah.
you got no excuse. You have some excuse for some of them. You don't have to watch the Baron of Arizona, but if you want to, you have no excuse.
Yeah. So next time we'll be talking about Hell and High Water. What are your expectations?
Well, if you look at the poster for Hell and High Water, which I've done, it looks like it's this naval kind of film with Richard Widmark as this guy who's presumably a naval officer on a battleship, but there's a little circle on the poster highlighting that they're just him and a lady kissing, just at randomly there. So I feel like we're going to get a little bit of an old Fuller shoehornerini of a romance in here. When usually, don't get me wrong, I'm not some sort of incel saying thank God there's not going to be any women in this film, but usually the kind of the battleship movie tends to be one where there doesn't need to be a shoehorned romance because there just aren't really characters. And don't go wrong, like I'm not saying that's a good thing, but it does make me really think that he's found a way to really shoehorn this romance into this film somehow. So that is my expectation. I'm wondering how this romance gets inserted into this film.
I'm quite interested in this, and just on a couple of technical notes, we are going to be seeing Fuller in color
Interesting.
for the first time. Yeah, for the first time, and also in CinemaScope. So we're going to see some widescreen Sam Fuller as well.
Interesting. So he's He's done that much quicker than, because we obviously did the Kurosawa podcast before. It took Kurosawa till the late 60s to get to widescreen, and it took him till the mid
1954.
70s to
Yeah.
54 to get to widescreen.
Oh no, this is Hell and High Water is 54. I do.
Yeah,
apologize.
this is 54. Yeah, I was saying the Kurosawa. I think we were getting widescreen in the sort of the. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it'd be sort of the, what was the first? Oh, Hidden Fortress, wasn't it? So it's a few years after this, and then he's in color, kind of in the first one's. It's Tedeschi Den, mid 70s. So he's but then Hollywood adopted these things a lot faster than the Japanese industry did anyway.
Yeah. I do believe as well with Fuller, we do jump. I might be wrong, but I think we might jump back to black and white a couple of times as well. So we're not necessarily done with black and white and Fuller. I might be completely wrong about that, but I'm sure a couple of them that I've seen are black and white. But yeah.
Interesting. I'm looking forward to it. I really don't know what to think about it. I can see in the synopsis that that the words communist Chinese are in there, so maybe there's a little bit more commie bashing in there as well. I'm looking forward to the Cold War aspect as well. That's always fun. So yeah, We'll see that next time. Hopefully it's on YouTube.
It is, don't worry.
Excellent.
See you next time.
All right then, see you next time.